He sat silently before the piano, the spotlight beating down on his sweat-soaked face. The concert hall was utterly still, hundreds of white eyes drilling into him as if to strip away each breath. He knew well, they hadn't come to honor him. They had come to see what a black man could do besides lifting sacks or mopping floors. They had come to reassure themselves, see, we give them a crust of bread, and in return they play and sing for us. Each piano key before him was like a blade. When he struck one, that blade could pierce the listener's heart, or turn back and slash open his own chest. But he would not retreat. For he had lived his whole life under the cuts of insults, the fists, the times he was thrown out of diners for stepping through a door marked whites only. One more wound would change nothing. Yet if this melody could cut through the thick hide of prejudice, then maybe, just maybe, it would leave a small crack. And through that crack, light could enter. This was America in 1947. A nation that shouted freedom yet built fences to keep black children from drinking at the same fountain as white children. A place that praised God with hymns, then that very night allowed their God to remain silent as a black man was lynched in the town square. He needed no one to lecture him about justice. He had seen his father denied work simply because of his skin color. He had seen his mother bite back her dignity as she was driven from a grocery store. And he had seen himself, a boy, ignored by his teacher when he asked to join the school orchestra. Music isn't for your kind. Those words still rang in his ears like a nail hammered deep. Had he been white, the press would have called him a genius. Had he been white, the great concert halls would have opened their doors. Had he been white, the songs he composed would have been played nationwide on the radio. But because he was black, all he heard was the sneer, a monkey that can bang on keys. They told him to forgive. The church taught him, be merciful. But how could he forgive when the very priest who preached the love of God stood idly by as the police dragged a black boy down the street? How could he forgive when every night he had to sprint home, knowing that lingering a few minutes longer could mean being beaten to death? Tonight, he sat here, before this piano, before those hundreds of white eyes, and he understood one thing: they could bar him from restaurants, bar him from their classrooms, but they could not bar a melody from entering their ears. Music needed no permit. A song knew no color. Music flowed straight into the blood. And within that bloodstream, prejudice had no voice. He closed his eyes. His fingers pressed down on the keys. And the hall held its breath. By the end of this story, you will know exactly how one man could turn pain into a weapon, music into a hammer that shattered invisible chains, and shake the heart of a nation gone numb with hatred. The next day, while the bruise on his face had yet to fade, the boy went back to school. He tried to hide his swollen, red hand behind his back. His classmates looked at him, some with pity, others shaking their heads. You were foolish. Why'd you touch their piano? The boy didn't answer. Deep down he knew, he wasn't foolish. He was doing the one thing that still made him feel human. At recess, he sat in the corner of the dusty schoolyard, playing with a few dry blades of grass. From the white school across the way came echoes of laughter and chatter. They had a paved playground, a new basketball hoop, and their own music teacher. The boy lifted his head, staring through the rusted wire fence that divided them. It wasn't even chest high, yet that gap felt as wide as an ocean. He wondered, if I crossed over there, would anyone ever listen to my music? One afternoon, rain poured down. His mother came home soaked, clutching a small bag of food. The boy cheered, thinking tonight's dinner might be better. But when she opened the bag, there was only some stale bread and a few bruised apples. They sold these cheap to me, she whispered, her eyes red. The boy picked up an apple, bit into it, the sour taste filling his mouth. He looked at his mother and, for the first time, understood what bitter humiliation felt like. That night, he sat at the old church piano. Wind blew in through the cracked window, mingling with the patter of rain. He placed his fingers on the keys and played a sorrowful melody. In the trembling notes he heard his father's sighs, his mother's muffled sobs, the mocking laughter of white boys. Music became a mirror reflecting it all. He played until his fingers bled on the chipped keys. But the blood blended into the sound, creating something sacred he could not name. One day, an old priest entered. He stood in silence, listening. When the song ended, he said only, "Your music carries fire. But that fire will consume you if you let hatred guide it." The boy lifted his head, eyes burning bright. "Without hatred, I'd have nothing left to play." The priest was silent, then turned away. That answer followed the boy for years. The years that followed were filled with beatings for no reason. Once, for stepping into a store meant for whites, he was dragged out and slammed to the ground. His hand broke, he couldn't play for a month. That night he cried quietly. His mother held him close, whispering, "They want you to quit. But if you give up, you'll already be dead today." Those words etched into him like a private hymn. Later, he played at a small gathering in the black community. People clapped, cheered, some even wept. A friend whispered, "When you play, I forget about them out there." The words pierced his heart like an arrow. He realized music wasn't just his weapon. It could be a shield for his whole community. But reality never relented. Every time he came home, there was the pounding at the door, police checks, excuses to harass. Once, his father was arrested simply for standing near the train station after curfew. He was jailed for 3 days. When he returned, his back was covered in lash marks. The boy saw it, placed trembling fingers on the piano keys, and played low, thunderous notes like a growl. In music, he unleashed his rage. In life, he stayed silent. Each day at school, he raised his eyes toward the fence separating the black school from the white one. Inside him, a question echoed, "When will I finally shatter this wall with my music?" The next day, while the bruise on his face had yet to fade, the boy went back to school. He tried to hide his swollen, red hand behind his back. His classmates looked at him, some with pity, others shaking their heads. "You were foolish. Why'd you touch their piano?" The boy didn't answer. Deep down he knew, he wasn't foolish. He was doing the one thing that still made him feel human. At recess, he sat in the corner of the dusty schoolyard, playing with a few dry blades of grass. From the white school across the way came echoes of laughter and chatter. They had a paved playground, a new basketball hoop, and their own music teacher. The boy lifted his head, staring through the rusted wire fence that divided them. It wasn't even chest high, yet that gap felt as wide as an ocean. He wondered, if I crossed over there, would anyone ever listen to my music? One afternoon, rain poured down. His mother came home soaked, clutching a small bag of food. The boy cheered, thinking tonight's dinner might be better. But when she opened the bag, there was only some stale bread and a few bruised apples. "They sold these cheap to me," she whispered, her eyes red. The boy picked up an apple, bit into it, the sour taste filling his mouth. He looked at his mother and, for the first time, understood what bitter humiliation felt like. That night, he sat at the old church piano. Wind blew in through the cracked window, mingling with the patter of rain. He placed his fingers on the keys and played a sorrowful melody. In the trembling notes he heard his father's sighs, his mother's muffled sobs, the mocking laughter of white boys. Music became a mirror reflecting it all. He played until his fingers bled on the chipped keys. But the blood blended into the sound, creating something sacred he could not name. One day, an old priest entered. He stood in silence, listening. When the song ended, he said only, "Your music carries fire. But that fire will consume you if you let hatred guide it." The boy lifted his head, eyes burning bright. "Without hatred, I'd have nothing left to play." The priest was silent, then turned away. That answer followed the boy for years. The years that followed were filled with beatings for no reason. Once, for stepping into a store meant for whites, he was dragged out and slammed to the ground. His hand broke, he couldn't play for a month. That night he cried quietly. His mother held him close, whispering, "They want you to quit. But if you give up, you'll already be dead today." Those words etched into him like a private hymn. Later, he played at a small gathering in the black community. People clapped, cheered, some even wept. A friend whispered, "When you play, I forget about them out there." The words pierced his heart like an arrow. He realized music wasn't just his weapon. It could be a shield for his whole community. But reality never relented. Every time he came home, there was the pounding at the door, police checks, excuses to harass. Once, his father was arrested simply for standing near the train station after curfew. He was jailed for 3 days. When he returned, his back was covered in lash marks. The boy saw it, placed trembling fingers on the piano keys, and played low, thunderous notes like a growl. In music, he unleashed his rage. In life, he stayed silent. Each day at school, he raised his eyes toward the fence separating the black school from the white one. Inside him, a question echoed, when will I finally shatter this wall with my music? One sweltering afternoon, the harsh sun cut across the town. The boy stepped into a drink stand, throat parched. The wooden door creaked, the sweet scent of lemon filled the air. He laid a few coins on the counter. The white shopkeeper scowled, "You're in the wrong place. That spout over there is for your kind." He pointed to a rusty water tap outside, the same one dogs and cats drank from. The boy froze, the coins lying untouched on the table. In his eyes, a fire ignited, not from thirst, but from humiliation. He turned away without a word. In his mind, piano keys thundered, a furious melody that wanted to tear the whole room apart. In his teenage years, he learned to swallow his anger. Every time he was called nigger, he stayed silent. Every shove in the street, he stayed silent. But at night, before the piano, he no longer kept quiet. Notes burst forth like the screams of imprisoned souls. The sound roared with no audience, only the moon and stars to bear witness. And in those lonely nights, he realized music was not only saving him, it was recording history in sound. One winter evening, his father brought home an old clipping from a white newspaper. Another black musician had been beaten to death by police, simply for daring to perform in a mixed club. His mother collapsed onto the floor, hands trembling. "Never, do you hear me? Never play music for white folks." But the boy stayed silent. In his heart, a thought had already taken root, that is exactly why I must play. At 14, he joined a small community gathering. The band was poor, the kerosene lamps dim. But when his hands touched the keys, the room transformed into another world. Old men closed their eyes, weeping. Children laughed and danced. An elderly black man placed a hand on his shoulder and whispered, "Your music gives me faith. Faith that one day, we will be seen as human." The words pierced him like a spear, awakening his sense of duty. Yet reality struck brutally. That night, on his way home, a group of white boys blocked his path. "I heard you had them screaming," one sneered. "Your kind is only meant to serve drinks, not to make anyone cry with music." Then the fists rained down. His cheeks split, his ears rang. When they left, their laughter howled like dogs. He lay on the cold ground, blood soaking his shirt. But in his mind, the music played on, a broken, sorrowful, yet defiant melody. After the beating, he never left the piano. His bandaged fingers still pressed the keys, slowly, painfully. His father snapped, "Do you want to die?" The boy looked up, his eyes unwavering. "If I give up the piano, I'm already dead." His father turned away in silence. He knew there was no stopping him now. From then on, every piece he wrote was stained with blood. Not imagined blood, but real blood, from his body, from his friends, from his entire community. His music carried injustice, but also strength. Even if only a handful listened, even if it echoed only in poor gatherings, it made hearts tremble. One evening, he sat by the window, moonlight falling on his scarred hands. He whispered, "If one day my music is played in white halls, they will have nowhere to hide. They will have to listen. And when they listen, they will have to see us." That night, the melody he wrote was no longer just for himself. He wrote for his father, his mother, for the black children buried under the fences of segregation. He wrote for the weary white hearts, too, the ones tired of hatred but afraid to admit it. In the suffocating darkness of his childhood, a warrior was forged. He carried no sword, no gun. Only music. but that seemingly fragile weapon would become the sharpest blade of all. At 16, his hands were calloused. Not from hard labor, but from thousands of hours pounding the worn-out keys of an abandoned church piano. Music flowed in his blood, surging through every vein. But the world outside hadn't changed. To them, he was still just a no-name black kid. Then one summer night, the black community in town held a street festival. Drums pounded, gospel voices rose, feet stomped in rhythm on the dusty ground. The bandleader turned to him. "Boy, give it a try." He hesitated, but when his hands touched the battered piano set up at the crossroads, the whole village seemed to hold its breath. The music erupted, sweet yet aching. Children stopped dancing, adults fell silent, mothers wept. That night, for the first time, he felt he wasn't alone. His playing spread quickly through the community. He was invited to dingy bars, where only cheap liquor and thick smoke filled the air. Sitting in the shadows, his fingers danced, weaving blues heavy with pain. Drunken men stopped, listening. Some set their bottles down, nodding slowly. "That kid plays like he's singing straight from my heart." But joy never lasted. One night, while he was playing in a cramped bar, the door burst open. 3 white policemen marched in, boots striking the floor. "Shut that noise down," one barked. The owner pleaded, but too late. A blow sent the old piano crashing down, its final chords groaning like a wounded cry. The boy was yanked from his seat, a slap cracking across his face. "Remember this, your music will never be heard outside this rat hole." Blood trickled from his lip. But in his ears, the music still played. After that night, many urged him to quit. "We've suffered enough, don't bring more trouble on yourself." But he refused. The more they tried to silence him, the more he hungered to be heard. He slipped into other neighborhoods, into the few bars that allowed both races. He played in the corners for loose change. Most white patrons sneered, glancing past him. But sometimes, just sometimes, a young white listener would pause, eyes wide, as if hearing for the first time the breath of another soul. One evening, a white couple wandered into a small bar where he was playing. They sat quietly, saying nothing, listening as he played a dark, sorrowful piece, the melody echoing like the groans of bodies bent over cotton fields. When the song ended, the woman wiped her tears. The man placed a bill on the piano lid, gave a solemn nod, and left. That night, the boy sat alone for a long while. Inside him, a spark flared. Music can make them cry. And when they cry, they'll have to see us. On sweltering summer nights, he wandered through dark alleys, carrying his battered wooden piano. Each time he stepped into a cramped black bar, the whole room erupted. People clapped, whistled, some even sang along with the music. In those moments, every humiliation from outside vanished. Music transformed the smoke-choked room into another world, a place where they were free, if only for a few hours. With each passing night, his music burned hotter. Whispers spread, "There's a boy who plays like blood runs through the keys." Night after night, he played until his hands bled, yet never stopped. He knew his music wasn't just joy, it was proof: we exist. We feel. We suffer, and we love. Then something unusual happened. A young white journalist from another town happened to pass by. He sat still, hands trembling as he held his pen. The next day, a small piece appeared in an anonymous weekly. "Last night, a sound kept me from sleeping. I don't know his name. I only know he is black. And his music, if you dare to listen, will tear your heart open." The article spread quietly. No one dared sign their real name, but in the shadows, the story was passed hand to hand. Black readers felt pride. Some white readers felt unease. They didn't want to admit it, but deep down, they knew it was true: music could cross the boundaries of race. One night, he was invited to play in a hidden house, where black people and a few progressive whites gathered. The room was small, lit only by flickering oil lamps, the air heavy with fear of discovery. He sat down, placed his hands on the keys. When the first notes rose, a white man, hard as stone, suddenly broke into tears. He whispered, "My God." I've never heard pain turned into sound like this. But joy always carried danger. After that performance, on his way home, he was stopped by a group of policemen. "Heard you've been playing for white folks, huh?" one sneered. A blow landed, blood spilling. They left him crumpled on the dirt road. He staggered up, clutching his chest in pain, but the words still echoed in his mind. "I've never heard pain turned into sound like this." That was proof. And proof could not be beaten to death. The next day, he sat again at the piano, his body wrapped in bandages. Each note that left the keys fell like a drop of blood hitting the floor. The audience sat silent, then erupted in thunderous applause. An elderly black woman grasped his hand, trembling. "Son, they may break your bones, but your music is already in our blood. No one can ever take it away." From that day on, in the black community, he was no longer just a musician. He became a fire. Each time he sat at the piano, people sat in reverence, as if in worship. They weren't just listening to music, they were hearing their own buried voices. And in those secret nights, a quiet faith began to grow. If one day, this music rings out in white concert halls, history will change. After the night in the old theater, nothing was the same. The news spread, though suppressed. No major paper dared print his name, but in cafes, in libraries, in whispered conversations, people spoke of the black musician whose playing silenced an all-white hall. On white streets, he noticed different glances. Not only contempt, but also curiosity and fear. Some quietly nodded as he passed. Others clenched their jaws. "We cannot let him pollute our music." One afternoon, he received a strange letter. The handwriting was delicate, the paper faintly scented with flowers. It was from a young white woman. She wrote that the first time she heard him play, her heart felt torn apart. "I grew up in a house where my father taught me that black people have no soul. But that night, you showed me yours was larger than the entire room. I have nothing else to say but thank you." His hand trembled as he held the letter. For the first time, a white person had thanked him. But not everyone shed tears. A group of white extremists plastered flyers across town. "Don't let the Negroes dirty our music. Don't listen to their rebellious noise." The police ignored it, some even laughed. One night, stones shattered his windows. He stood in the dark, watching figures flee, his body shaking with rage. Instead of shouting, he sat at the piano and played a mournful piece. The music poured out the window, mingling with the wind. He told himself, "They can throw stones, but they can't stop the music." Meanwhile, the black community began to see him as a symbol. They crowded to hear him, not only for the music, but to find faith. An old man told him, "Son, when your music rises, we are no longer slaves. For a moment, we are free." Then came a strange night. He was invited to perform at a private party in a wealthy white household. The invitation came from the very girl who had written the letter of thanks. At first, he hesitated. Then he agreed, not to entertain, but to plant a crack in their wall of arrogance. When he entered the glittering mansion, every eye turned. Elegant men and women in fine clothes raised glasses of wine, staring at him like an exotic animal. But when the music began, the room fell silent. The first notes were gentle as wind, then thundered like a storm. A little white girl, the host's daughter, slipped from her chair and walked to the piano, eyes wide. When the piece ended, she clapped, her small hands echoing through the hall. Her father, the same man who had loudly opposed the fight against segregation, froze. He did not clap. His face was rigid. But in his eyes, just for a moment, the boy saw something, a crack. And any wall, no matter how thick, begins to fall from a single fracture. After the night at the mansion, his music became the subject of whispers everywhere. In elegant cafes, people murmured about the black pianist who silenced an entire party. Many shook their heads in disbelief. Nonsense. What would a Negro know about art? Yet some stayed quiet, for the melodies still echoed in their hearts. A week later, he received an invitation to perform at a small city hall, an audience made up mostly of white faces. As he walked in, the air was thick with tension. Suspicious eyes bore into him, some faces showed open contempt. He ignored them. He sat down, placed his hands on the keys. The music began, at first a gentle blues, then swelling into a wail of anguish. Each note fell like a hammer blow against their hearts. Some squirmed in their seats, some prepared to leave, but then a strange silence spread. They were caught, like prey entranced. When the final chord died, the hall was hushed. From a far corner, a lone pair of hands clapped. Then another. Then more. Finally, the entire room rose to its feet. Applause thundered, like summer storms crashing through the night. But outside, the darkness grew heavier. Extremists hung a black effigy at his door, scrawled with, "Your music will die with you." They lit flares in the yard, hurled rocks through his windows. His mother clutched her chest in fear, his father clenched his fists. He said nothing. Instead, he dragged the piano to the porch, sat amid the red glow of fire, and played. The mob jeered, but some among them, without knowing why, fell silent. The next day, a white man knocked at the door. A high school teacher from town. He spoke softly, eyes averted. "I heard you play last night. I cannot say this in front of others, but your music made me ashamed. I once told my students that black people felt nothing. You proved me wrong. Thank you." The young man stood in silence, unable to answer. In that moment, he understood, every song, every note, was a blade driven into the false heart of society. And then came a historic night. He was invited to perform in a larger concert hall, this time filled with white faces, powerful men, aristocratic women draped in fur. The tension was suffocating. He stepped out, his scarred hand catching the light. The hall was still. He spoke no words. He simply placed his hands on the keys. The music erupted, not a weeping blues, but a fierce, searing anthem. Within it were the sounds of lashes cracking, the cries of children, the screams of despair, yet also a burning faith. The notes rose like fire, crashing against the ceiling, sweeping the audience into the storm. When the piece ended, he lifted his head. The hall was frozen. Then, suddenly, a silver-haired man stood. A judge, known for his hardline conservatism. He pulled a handkerchief, wiping his eyes. The hall shuddered. Then, one by one, people rose. Applause surged like waves. They were no longer clapping for a black man. They were clapping for the music that had shattered the chains inside their own hearts. After the great concert, his name was no longer a secret. The rumor spread beyond the city, past the borders of small towns. People retold the moment a conservative judge stood to wipe his tears, and an all-white audience clapped like thunder. For the black community, it was a miracle. For white extremists, it was humiliation. The very next morning, the local paper carried a blazing headline, "Danger, Negro Music Poisoning the Soul of America." They branded him a rebel, a threat to social order. They warned whites, "Do not let your hearts grow weak before cries disguised as music." But it was too late. Once a melody entered the ear, no one could erase it. Among the letters he received, there weren't just death threats but trembling confessions from white people. "Your music made me rethink how I treat my black neighbors. I never dared cross the street before, but now I want to shake their hands." The extremists struck back hard. One night, he returned home to find his yard in flames, fire licking the roof. Neighbors rushed to help, while he stood frozen, eyes burning red. The blaze roared, but in his heart, a new melody rose, furious, suffocating, as though the fire itself were singing. The next night, he played it before a black audience. They called it the Song of Fire. It spread, becoming a symbol. "They can burn us, but they cannot extinguish us." Police harassment continued. He was arrested repeatedly for disturbing public order. Yet every time he walked out of the jail, the black community welcomed him with singing and applause, as if greeting a hero. And strangely, along the fences, some white townsfolk stood in silence, not throwing stones anymore, but listening as the songs rolled out like waves. Then came another historic night. He was invited to perform at a benefit concert for the anti-segregation movement. This time the hall was filled with both black and white, seated side by side, once unimaginable. The air was tense, as though one spark could ignite it all. He sat at the piano, drew a long breath. The music began. At first, soft as a whisper. Then the notes grew stronger, deeper, more fierce. He played not only with his hands, but with childhood memories, with beatings, with wrongful deaths, with thank you letters, with contemptuous glances, with every tear shed because of his music. The hall went utterly silent. An old white man bowed his head. A young black man gripped the hand of his white friend beside him. When the piece ended, there was no more distance. People rose, black and white together, their applause mingling. Someone shouted, "We can't go back anymore." That night, voices of unity drowned out the hatred outside. But he knew the danger was far from over. Out on the roads, white hoods still drifted by, eyes burning with malice. Yet he also knew this: they could never silence the music again. It had already entered the bloodstream of both sides. And once music is in the blood, it lives forever. The applause after the concert was pierced by angry shouts from the streets. In the darkness, the white hoods of extremists drifted like ghosts. They could not bear the sight of white people standing for a black man. And they decided he had to be crushed. One night, as he returned home, the door was smashed open. On the wall, scrawled in red, "Shut up, or die." His mother clung to him, trembling. His father gripped his shoulders, whispering, "You can leave. You can stay silent. We need you alive." He nodded, but in the depth of his eyes, the decision was clear: he would not be silent. The next day, he sat once again at the piano in the community church. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of responsibility. Before him, dozens of dark, weathered faces, young and old, waited. They needed him. He drew a deep breath, pressed the keys. The music roared, fierce, furious. No longer a bomb, but resistance itself. Each note was a cry of defiance. When the piece ended, the hall erupted, applause, tears, voices shouting, "We are not afraid." The news spread quickly. And with it, retaliation came closer. Police stormed his next performance, accusing him of unlawful assembly. They beat him, bound him, dragged him into the street. He collapsed, blood on his lips. Yet even as he lay broken, his voice rose, weak but clear: "You can destroy the instruments, but you cannot destroy the music in our hearts." The crowd roared, and in that moment, he was no longer a man, he was a banner. After his arrest, he emerged from the cell battered and bruised. Many thought he would give up. But the next night, the piano sounded again. Fragile, halting, but alive. And that fragility broke hearts even more. An old black woman knelt before the piano, weeping, "You have given us a voice that no one ever heard before." Yet vengeance did not stop. One night, during a performance in a poor bar, the door burst open. A gang of white men stormed in, hurling bottles, screaming, "Go back where you belong." Chaos erupted, people ran, people fell. But he did not flee. He sat still, kept playing. The music drowned beneath the noise of breaking glass, but the notes kept coming. When the mob finally left and the room lay in ruins, he was still there, eyes closed, hands trembling on the keys. Those who remained stared at him, choked with tears. "If you don't give up the piano, we won't give up on you." That night, for the first time, he realized this was no longer his fight alone. It was the fight of an entire people, and he was their battle drum. In the days that followed, his life became a ceaseless whirl of threats and music. At dawn, he would find his door smeared with tar and feathers, a familiar humiliation. At night, he heard the clatter of hooves and the cruel laughter of extremists circling his house. His mother was too afraid to sleep. His father sat on the porch with a stick in hand, keeping watch. Yet still, he left the house, still went to the piano. One night, while playing in a bar, the police raided again. This time, they didn't only target him. They beat the audience, men and women thrown to the floor, blood spreading across the boards. He cried out, "Leave them alone," and rushed forward. A baton struck his head, the lights went black. When he awoke, he was in a stinking cell, a deep gash across his forehead. In prison, he had no piano, no music. But in his mind, the keys kept sounding. He tapped rhythms on the wall, humming softly to himself. Other black prisoners listened, then joined in by knocking on their walls. Slowly, the entire cell block became a silent orchestra. The guards shouted, lashed their batons against the bars, but the music did not stop. In that moment, he understood. His music had become a fire, spreading to every captive soul. When he was finally released, his body was frail, but his eyes blazed. People thought he would go silent. But the very next night, he sat at the piano again. This time, not only black faces came. In the back of the room, a few white listeners sat quietly, their faces hidden in shadow. They said nothing, only listened. And when the music ended, they rose and left without a word. But in that fleeting moment when their eyes met, he saw something. They had changed. But the price was inevitable. One morning, as he stepped outside, he saw a burning cross blazing in the yard. Beside it, scrawled words read, "This is your final warning." The flames lit up his mother's pale face, his father's trembling hands. He stood still, fists clenched. Then, instead of fear, he walked to the piano in the living room and began to play. The sound of the keys rose above the crackling fire. Black neighbors gathered, forming a circle around the house. They didn't speak, they simply sang with the music, turning fear into collective strength. But tragedy struck. A close friend of his, the drummer in their small band, was beaten to death in the street, his only crime, laughing too loud in front of whites. The news pierced him like a knife to the heart. He sat at the piano for hours, not playing a single note. But at the funeral, he sat down and played a song to send his friend off. The music thundered, and tears flowed from every eye. Outside the cemetery, a white man stood silently, removed his hat, and bowed his head. After that death, he knew for certain, this was no longer his fight alone. This was a fight for survival, where music was both a weapon and a target. He chose to continue, knowing full well he could be next. That night, he wrote a new piece, the most powerful of his life. It began with a trembling melody, like the cry of a child, then swelled into the roar of an entire people. He gave it a name, "We Are Still Here." When he performed it, the hall was packed. Black listeners wept, white listeners sat in silence, some even holding each other's hands, something unimaginable just a few years earlier. And in the music, he heard his own voice say, "You may break my bones, you may take my life. But I, and my music, are still here." One sweltering morning, the town square was packed with people. They held banners, shouting for the right to live, to learn, to be human. On the steps of the church, he sat before an old piano. The chants thundered through the air, but when he placed his hands on the keys, the crowd suddenly fell silent. The music began. At first, soft, like a prayer. Then the notes pressed harder, like the footsteps of thousands marching forward. The melody soared, joining the chants, "Freedom, justice, equality." The entire square trembled. A white journalist present that day wrote, "I no longer knew if I was hearing music or the voice of an entire people rising." The piece "We Are Still Here" quickly became an anthem of protest. People copied it by hand, passed it from mouth to mouth, sang it in the streets. Every time the police cracked down, the piano or the voices rose again. And strangely, even some young white officers lowered their heads, shaken by the music. A few later confessed, "I raised my baton, but my hand trembled because of his song." He began touring across the South. Though banned, beaten, and blocked, at every town the black community gathered, cramming into churches, small halls, even standing outside in the open, to listen. To them, he was no longer just a musician. He was their voice, living proof that they were not silent. One night in Montgomery was unforgettable. When demonstrators were jailed, those left outside gathered at the prison. They hauled in the old piano, placed it in the street, and asked him to play. The music rose, echoing through the iron bars. Prisoners inside sang back. The entire jail shook with music and song. An old guard stood motionless for a long while, then wept. The story spread everywhere. The press could no longer ignore it. Some newspapers began to call him the artist of the movement. Carefully at first, but his name was now printed, linked with the word justice. Of course, danger never left him. Extremists intensified their threats, promising assassination. But each time he was threatened, he wrote another song. And so, every threat became another anthem for the movement. The march on the Capitol ended, but its echoes did not fade. Recordings were broadcast everywhere. On the radio, the commentator's voice broke. "We have just witnessed a black man use music in place of a chant, and an entire people sang with him." From then on, whenever there was a protest, that song was heard. It was no longer his alone. It had become everyone's. Once, he received a letter from a white soldier stationed far away. In it, the soldier wrote, "I once believed skin color determined worth. But when I heard your music on the radio, I realized I was in it too, the fear, the faith, the longing. I don't know how to apologize, but please know this, I have changed." Holding the letter, his eyes filled with tears. After years of being despised, here was a white man bowing, willingly, before his music. Yet danger never left him. One night, after a concert in a great church, he stepped outside to find a group of white men blocking the way. One shouted, "Your music defile America." But before they could strike, another group of whites, his own listeners, stepped forward to shield him. "If you want to harm him, you'll have to go through us first." That night, for the first time, he saw white people defend him. The music's waves reached even the North, where many had never seen Jim Crow's cruelty firsthand. Yet when they listened, they wept. Major newspapers could no longer stay silent. This music is no longer the work of an individual. It is the cry for justice. His name appeared openly, no longer hidden in the shadows. Then came a historic moment. At a rally of tens of thousands, he was invited to sit at a piano placed at the foot of the Capitol steps. Before him stretched a sea of people, flags waving, voices shouting freedom. He laid his hands on the keys, closed his eyes. The music rose, the music of a wounded childhood, of lashes, of prisons, of fire, of tears, of hope. The piano's voice merged with the footsteps of tens of thousands. The entire Capitol seemed to shake. On the platform, a white politician whispered, "Perhaps we were wrong. If one melody can make an entire nation weep together, then hatred has already lost." When the piece ended, silence fell. Then applause erupted, booming like thunder. Black people embraced one another in tears. White people clasped hands. In that moment, no one asked about the color of skin. There were only human beings. That night, he sat alone, staring at his scarred hands. He knew music alone could not change everything. But he had planted a seed in the soil, a seed the nation would have to nurture. And he smiled, whispering, "We are still here. And the music will remain, forever." Many years had passed since his song first rang out beneath the steps of the Capitol. His hair had turned silver, his scarred hands trembled with age. Yet every time he sat before the piano, his back remained straight, and his eyes still burned like a flame that had never gone out. Society was far from perfect. There were still contemptuous stares, unjust trials, and the word "N** are spat through clenched teeth. But there were also changes that could not be denied. In schools, white and black children now studied together. On the radio, his music was played not only in black communities but also on major stations. In concert halls, the doors were no longer divided by race, but shared as one. One autumn afternoon, he walked slowly into a university auditorium. Hundreds of students awaited him, white and black side by side. They had not come to challenge, nor to mock. They had come to listen. When he placed his hands on the keys, the hall fell silent. They weren't only hearing music, they were hearing history in every note. After the performance, a white student approached, eyes brimming. "Sir, I don't know how to apologize for the generations before me. But I promise, ours will not turn away." He laid a hand on the young man's shoulder and nodded. Yet in those moments, old memories still returned. He remembered friends lost to violence, the scars on his father's back, the tears in his mother's eyes. He knew music could never erase those losses. It could only make the pain heard, so that no one could deny it. One day, he returned to his hometown. The rickety wooden house was now only ruins. But the church where he had once secretly played piano still stood, though its roof had caved in and its walls were cracked. He stepped inside, laid his hand on the broken keys. A hoarse sound rang out, weak, but still music. He smiled softly. This is where it all began. People began to call him the soul of the movement. But he always shook his head. "I am only the messenger. It is you, the ones who dared to rise, to weep, to change, who are the soul." In the final years of his life, he lived in a small house on the outskirts of town. No luxury, no wealth. Only an old piano, a few shelves of books, and black and white photographs capturing moments when he stood amidst seas of people. Each morning, he sat by the window, sunlight falling across his wrinkled face, his trembling fingers brushing the keys. The music was no longer powerful as before, yet within its fragility lay a different beauty, the beauty of resilience weathered through storms. Society began to speak his name in speeches, in history books. There were ceremonies of honor, awards, medals bestowed. On the podium, he listened as people praised, "You changed the nation with your music." He smiled, but in his heart thought, "I did not change the nation. I only knocked on the door of its heart. It was you who opened it." Once, he was invited to a grand concert, where thousands of black and white listeners sat together, with no barrier between them. When he stepped out, the entire hall rose to its feet. The applause rolled like thunder. He sat and played an old song, the one that had once sounded in a poor bar when he was still a boy. But this time, it did not echo in darkness. It rang beneath brilliant lights, in the recognition of a whole society. Many wept, not only for the melody, but because they knew they were hearing a living piece of history. Yet he never allowed himself illusions. One evening, after a performance, he returned to see a wall in the city painted in red, "A Negro is still a Negro." His heart clenched. After all the years, all the blood spilled, there were still those who clung to hatred. He understood, the road was still long. Justice was not yet whole. His music was only a torch to be passed on, and the next generation would need to carry it forward. In his final days, students, friends, and journalists came to see him. He often said, "If there is one thing I have learned in life, it is this: music does not change laws. It does not break chains in the world outside. But it makes hearts tremble. And when hearts tremble, the world is forced to change." Then, one night, he sat alone, looking at his trembling hands. He placed them on the keys and played the familiar piece, the first song he had ever written, back in the abandoned church, when blood still ran from his lips after a beating. The notes were weak, but complete. When the melody ended, he closed his eyes, leaving behind a peaceful smile. On the day he died, thousands came to mourn. Black and white, old and young, all sang his song. The streets turned into a vast chorus. In their hands there were no batons, no guns, only voices raised in song. That was his greatest legacy, to turn pain into music, and music into awakening. The candle he lit has gone out. But its light has never disappeared. It runs through every piano key, every voice raised in song, every marching step, every tear shed by those who dared to believe that freedom is not the privilege of one color. Some will say music is nothing more than an echo that fades. But if music had no power, why did extremists tremble when they heard it? Why did a hall full of white faces have to rise to their feet when a black man played? Why did a nation long accustomed to silence break down and weep at a melody? Music does not change society by magic. It does only one thing: it exposes the heart. And once the heart is revealed, no wall can ever hide the truth. You may feel this society is unjust, cruel, giving you no place. But remember, it is within that very injustice that we can find the fire. And when that fire ignites, it lights the way not only for you, but for an entire generation. They may mock you. They may beat you. They may burn your home, take your friends. But if you hold on to your voice, through words, through actions, or through music, then you have already won. And the raw truth, in the end, is this. You may feel this society is unjust, but we must still fight, and build a new, civilized one.